Hi everybody, and today I just want to talk about The Turning, which is it was a Tim Winton adaptation of a number of short stories where Robert Connolly basically oversaw a quite a large production where he asked a number of actors and directors to become involved in this Tim Winton adaptation, where he basically asked the directors to pick a Tim Winton story and basically adapt it. And that's what you have in The Turning. So, in a way, it's a number of short films placed in sort of, in one sort of linear line to make one feature film. But it could be read as one sort of, continuous narrative if you want to play it like that. Even though there's always different actors coming in and playing sort of, the same character. Different actors will be playing the same character. A lot of the directors involved in the film are actually actors themselves. And again, I've been talking the last couple of weeks about performance, and you can always guarantee with Australian films is actually really good performances. Very rarely do you see an Australian film with bad performances, and this is why international actors are always really keen to come to Australia and actually be in Australian films, because the reputation of Australian films as far as performance goes is really, really high. And that would be another reason, I think, why actors are also drawn to directing in Australia. Okay, so I do want to talk about The Turning. It is a really, I don't know if it's a seminal film. It could be a seminal film as far as changing the way that films are exhibited and marketed and distributed. But it's certainly, we don't know if it's a seminal film because we're still in very early stages with the film, and we're not really sure if it will actually, sort of begin other directors sort of coming in and doing similar things with their own distribution. But certainly, I think we are at the crossroads with the industry where we actually need to do some different things as far as thinking about distribution and the way we exhibit the films, because clearly there are real problems when we go through the traditional avenues of distribution. Okay, now the thing about Tim Winton's The Turning, so this is Robert Connolly, and I'll talk about Robert Connolly today. I think Robert Connolly is really interesting. So he makes Bellabo, which doesn't do well. He writes the White Paper, which we looked at last week, and then he comes up with The Turning. And the thing about The Turning is, generally when a film doesn't do well and the director has to sort of have a hit, so to speak, what often happens is the director is sort of persuaded almost to make a big film, a popular film, a genre film, an action film, a film with explosions and all of that. And what Robert Connolly's doing is he's continually making smaller films, but he's actually doing it in a way that taps in directly into particular audience demographics. And I think that's a credit to him. And also, I think that's kind of inspiring for other filmmakers, that you don't actually have to go down the popular action road to make interesting films that can actually attract an audience. It's just about thinking about the audience from the sort of the get-go. And that's audiences are something I really do want to concentrate on for the remainder of the course, but just by thinking about audiences and whether Australian films actually engage with their audiences early enough in their production and just the development of their films. Now you can see by these figures here, the Turning did really well. Now, if you watch The Turning, Turning is a small film. It's an independent film. It's the sort of film you wouldn't expect to have a big box office, but it actually did really well. It made $1 million in Australia, and for a film of this size, and it was a very small film, it did really, really well. And you think of that. So this is a film that's trumping, say, The Rover at the box office, and The Rover, spending 12 million and actually not even making $1 million back at the box office. So in the first week, The Turning made 200,000. Second week, 156,000, and then sort of started to lose. But if you actually, I think that what's interesting about this figure here is the theatres. Okay, so this is how many screens it's actually opening on, and it's not opening on a big number of screens. It's actually opening only on a few screens. But the fact is, what they're doing is event screenings, and I'll talk about event screenings across this lecture. So these are just some stats that have come out from Screen Australia recently. I'll talk about their sort of the broader research that they were doing, which is actually a report that's just sort of come out, and it is interesting what they have gathered. Basically, they're saying that Australia are producing more films, but there aren't as many screens to play the film. So what's happening is more films are competing for a smaller share of the box office. And what Robert Connolly is doing is saying, well, rather than be part of this this sort of bottleneck problem where there's so many films just trying to get onto screens. What he's actually doing is coming up with a different model of actually exhibiting his films and a different model of distributing his films. And it seems that with the success of The Turning and the success of other films he's done through this event screening model, that it actually does have some sort of relevance to the way that film people are actually going to the movies and watching movies. This other stat on the right hand side here is 10 years ago there were 33 fewer films competing for smaller number of screens, which is again, it's really interesting that more films are being made now, but there's actually less cinemas and less screens to actually play them. So the Ballabo strategy. So basically what happened is Robert Connolly makes Ballabo. The film doesn't do well at all. Robert Connolly became very frustrated, and he just felt that Australian films were kind of smashing their head against a brick wall when they were trying to be distributed in the same way that American films are being distributed in the country. So what he did is he came up with this whole idea of called the event screening, and he named the company CinemaPlus, and CinemaPlus is an active company. You can actually, they've got a Facebook page, so you can check them out. I'm sure they've got a website, and basically it's a gig-like release. So what happens is with the event screenings, is there's only a few screenings, right, across, and you have to go and you have to be part of the event. You have to be part of the sort of like a concert, like when someone comes to town, you actually have to get a ticket, you have to go, and you have to be part of the experience. And the whole idea is that the cinema is going to be packed, and there's going to be a really great atmosphere in the film. And this is another problem of Australian films, where what is happening with a lot of Australian films is you go to see an Australian film, and there'll be 3 people in the cinema, and it just feels really being there. And what Robert Connolly is trying to do is actually make a bit more of a buzz in the room for Australian films. Now, the problem with what happens when you distribute through a distributor, right, is that often you get put in the multiplex, and therefore you keep competing with a whole range of Hollywood films. Now, what Robert Connolly is doing with CinemaPlus is he's hiring out cinemas, right? So he's hiring out cinemas for this. So he's actually taking on a similar thing to what is happening with the film festival, with the way that film festivals will hire out venues for their films. So they can kind of do whatever they want within that space. And I think that's really important because it gives you great control over where your film plays, how it plays, how many screens it opens on, and things like that. Now, the interesting thing about The Turning is it did get a distributor, but it also did event screenings. And the event screenings got such a buzz, it actually inspired a distributor to come on board and actually sort of take the film on. So the festival format is really being there and being part of it. So this becomes as equally important as the films. And, this is the problem, I think, with a lot of Australian films, that there isn't really a sense of event or a sense of occasion. And if there is a sense of event or a sense of occasion, often when the films leave the cinema, people kind of lose interest in seeing them. And, that's a real problem. So what Robert Connolly is saying is these are the films you have to go out and see on the screen and on the big screen. So this is Robert Connolly's white paper, and basically this is his problem. This is why he came up with this new model of the event screening. So he's basically saying, if you distribute your film in the traditional way, what you have is, say you pay $18 for a ticket, all right? $11 of your money goes to the exhibitor, so that's the people playing the film. $6 goes to the distributor, that's the people actually in control and actually putting the film into different venues, and the producer, the actual filmmaker, gets $1. So they get $1 from every ticket sold. And he was saying that is actually crazy because before the producer receives their money, the distributor firstly repays marketing costs and deducts a 25 to 30% commission. So basically, what Robert Connolly is saying is the producer is always going to be running at a loss unless you have a bona fide mega sensation hit. You're not going to actually make any money as a producer. And he's saying that again, that system has to change. So Robert Connolly sort of has 2 problems. He has 2 problems with the way of the tickets being structured and also the way of the productions being structured, where filmmakers are getting a percentage from the budget, not a percentage from the box office. So he's also saying that the exhibition is also a problem. Now, this is what Robert Connolly had to say. If we assume that exhibition and distribution will continue to have a stranglehold on the income stream, then the only income a producer can expect is from the fees and overheads within the film's production budget. This has the perverse effect of encouraging the producer to increase the budget. The more sustainable business model would be one driven by a lower cost of production, a tighter turnaround between productions, and a share of gross revenues for the producer. This would create a virtuous circle where the interests of producers, distributors, and exhibitors were all aligned around the objective of making successful Australian films. So this goes for production, but it also goes for exhibition. And he's basically saying, if your film is in a cinema and you're only getting $1 for every ticket sold, right, and the exhibitor is getting 11, there's actually a problem there. And the problem is you actually need a system where the producer is getting a lot more back from their ticket sales, and a lot more than, say, the exhibitor. Now the exhibitor does have a lot of overheads, but something does need to be looked at in regard to that. So after Ballabo, Robert Connolly did basically he made Underground, which is the Julian Assange story. And I don't know if you've seen Underground. Underground's a really interesting film. I mean, the interesting thing about Underground is that he actually premiered the film on television. So this whole idea that you need to avoid television, and television's sort of the last place for a film to go, is actually, again, he sort of questioned that thing. Because what he's saying is, this is the thing, if a film plays at the cinema, it gets a lot of publicity, a lot of promotion. All right, because the posters, it gets reviews in the newspaper, things like that. But what Robert Connolly's saying is, if you actually play or premiere a film on television, right, the advertising on television actually creates a buzz about the film. So what he did is he premiered Underground on Channel 10, right, to 1.3 million watched it, and then he put it into the Nova in Melbourne as an event screening. So he did a couple of screenings, and what he did, he had Q&As and things like that, and the film did really, really well in the cinema. So it's just thinking of what it's actually trying to get away from this traditional way of distribution and exhibition. Right, now, so Robert Connolly established CinemaPlus. It entails a select number of special event screenings around the nation. Now, like I said, Underground launched at Melbourne Cinema Nova and the Palace in Brighton. Now, what happens with each event screening, and this is why they're important, is they have Q&As. Julian Assange's mother, Christine, was at a lot of the Q&As. There was a meet and greet session with the filmmakers, and there was also, he actually did an directing the actor workshop, which I'm sure would have been really, really fascinating. So what he's actually able to do is he's hiring out these cinemas. Right, he's actually recouping a lot of the money. All he's doing is paying basically a rental fee for the cinemas, and he's gaining a lot more money through that avenue than, say, just going through the traditional distributor. Now, the traditional distributor will get your film in far more screens across the country, but you're having to pay out a lot more for those screens. So you control where the film goes and how many screens it actually plays on. So the Turning comes out, and the thing about the Turning is it's basically, its tagline was a unique cinema event, right? This whole thing of a unique cinema event. Now, event screenings for the Turning, they had booklets, so you went to the film and you received a booklet. They were in small exhibition venues, which is always, there's something far more intimate about the small exhibition venue. I think there was a Q&A. There was different people involved with the film appeared at different screenings. So that was another excitement of the film. You didn't really know who you were going to see at the screenings, whether it would be Cate Blanchett or Hugo Weaving, many, many actors, Wayne Blair. Which again kind of made it really exciting. And the fact that there's only a few screenings of the film, again, sort of really encouraged people to get out there, get their tickets, go and see it, in that sort of film festival format. And there is something about the event screening following the tradition of the film festival format. Because what actually happens in the film festival format is because they hire out their venues, again, they can sort of play, the sorts of films, any films that they want. And it actually, there's great strength and ability to play the sorts of films you want to play in that format opposed to that more traditional way. So now, so CinemaPlus is doing really well. So he had the Julian Assange story, which did really well. He had The Turning, which has done really well. Now, what Connolly is doing is actually buying international films and he's distributing them through this CinemaPlus model. Now, the question, I guess, is whether this will work. So there was actually an Eric Bana film called Closed Circuit, which is actually an okay film. It's actually better than you would think it would be. And what they did is this was a film that was just going to go straight to video on demand and DVD in Australia. So what they did is they thought actually there is something about playing this film in the cinema which they really wanted to do. So they did a number of event screenings for the film. And the screenings featured Eric Bana. So what Eric Bana did is he basically travelled with the film across the country. And like I was talking about last week about the staggered release, there's great benefits in the staggered release because the key creators can travel with the film as they're opening in different states. If everything opens on the same day, you just can't do that. And Closed Circuit basically becomes the first film that they're doing. I don't know if they're doing other international films, but it could be really interesting to see actually what they do with it. Now you can actually just see the box office in Australia. It's done as well as the UK. Now the film didn't do well. Okay, it didn't do well anywhere. Like it's 68,000 is really nothing, and 64,000 Australian dollars that is in the UK is really nothing. But the interesting thing is in Australia it makes just as much as the UK by only doing a few screenings. So there's something about that. Now the thing about the event screenings is the tickets are a little bit more expensive because you actually get those extra things like the Q&A, you get the booklet and things like that. But it just seems that people are far more interesting to be involved with that idea than, say, the more traditional going to Hoyts on a Saturday night idea. So just a final thought here. Unlike many local directors who get bitter or leave for Hollywood, Robert Connolly's found a way to work the system and survive within the system. So he makes the films that he wants to make, and that's the thing about The Turning. He could have actually gone and done the bigger films. Now, some people would say, oh, but he went and made Paper Planes, and that's kind of his way of actually making a commercial film. But the thing about Paper Planes is they did actually do 3D screenings of Paper Planes, and they did that through the event cinema way, where they did Q&As, and they had, I think, posters at the event screenings and things like that. So even for a film like Paper Planes, he's actually saying that there's actually reason to have event screenings more than the more traditional ways of doing that. Now, what Robert Connolly has done through these films is actually created a reputation for himself as making films for particular niche audiences. Right, and he understands this demographic, and he's making the films that they want to see. So the final question that I have for you are this: Are Australian films being innovative enough with their distribution? Are Australian films catering directly to their niche audience? And should government funding go into subsidising exhibition as much as production? Now imagine if an exhibitor was not solely dependent on their box office receipts for survival. And that's something I think that we really need to look into, because when we think about government investment, we always talk about production. But the problem is exhibition, or the exhibitor, right? Their whole income is based on box office sales. Now, what if the government were actually putting money into exhibition like it does with the film festival? So with the film festival, what you've actually got is you've got government investment, you've got sponsorship, and then you've got ticket sales. Right? But the thing about the film festival is they're not 100% dependent on ticket sales. So that means they can be really innovative with the sorts of films that they're playing. And this is the problem with exhibition at the moment in Australia, where what's happening is there's nothing innovative of what's actually going on, certainly through those multiplexes. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this, which I think should you should sort of give a little bit of credit to the exhibitor. The exhibitor basically is having to buy all of this digital technology, and this is in the reading for this week. So they're actually having to buy all this digital technology, which is a lot of money. right? So to pay for that money, they're having to pay for it through basically ticket sales. So what they're actually doing is they're hiking up the price of the ticket sales to make sure that they sort of get the money to afford all this digital technology, including 3D screens and things like that. But what would happen if basically governments were actually helping them pay for the equipment? What would happen if they had commercial sponsorship through exhibition? All these different ways of thinking about the way that films are playing. Now, this could mean a number of things. It could mean that ticket sales could actually go down because the exhibitor wouldn't be so dependent on the making their revenue through ticket sales alone. But it also means that they could be far more innovative in the films that they play, because what's happening at the moment with the exhibitors is if a film isn't being sold out, it's basically seen as a bit of a waste. So what's happening is for an Australian film, for say, a small Australian film, they're not really being given a very long run at the cinema, because exhibitors get very, very nervy after a couple of days. If the film's really not selling out sessions, they'll just cancel the session and they'll basically put another big Hollywood film in. So it's interesting to think about what's actually going on in the industry right now, and I think we are at an interesting crossroad with the industry, through what's going on, and we should really be questioning everything. What Robert Connolly is saying is, let's not just question the way that we're producing films and the way that we're raising money for films. Let's actually look at the way that we're playing films and exhibiting films and distributing films. And surely there are other avenues to go than just say, because what's happening is people are saying, well, you can just bypass the cinema and go straight to video on demand, right? And we'll be looking at that in a couple of weeks with The Mule, which is an Australian film that did that, which did really well. But what Robert Connolly is saying is, no, there's something really important and unique and special about the cinema and the cinema experience. And why shouldn't Australian films be part of that experience? But what he's saying is, you need to avoid the multiplex avenue, because those films often just bomb, and Australian films really don't do well through that strategy. But through the event cinema strategy, where there's fewer screenings, but there's events, and the filmmakers are all part of it, and everybody's excited to be there, and it feels like a film festival atmosphere, then why that seems to be the way forward. And I just think it's really interesting to kind of be questioning everything that's going on in the cinema right now, and especially through exhibition. And perhaps this is a way forward to actually think about government funding going more into exhibition than it currently is. Okay, I'll leave it there. I look forward to seeing you in class.